Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and in this video we're going to do is we're going to introduce DOM manipulation. So we're going to be talking about not just plain vanilla DOM manipulation, but jQuery and web components all in one video. This will just give you the core skills needed to start working with the DOM. But first, what is the DOM? So what I'm going to do is instead of just set up a basic HTML page. So here we have our HTML boilerplate. I'm just going to add an H1 real quick. And this links to our JavaScript file, index.js, which right now is empty. Links to a CSS file, but I'm not going to really be doing any CSS, or at least any style sheets in this video. H1. Okay, and then we'll say hello world. So just so that way there's something on the screen. Okay, and here we have, now we'll open this up in the browser, open in terminal. Okay, and I didn't mean to open that in terminal. I meant to open containing folder. And we're going to open up the index.html in Google Chrome so we can see it. And there you go, hello world. Okay, nice. Now when I hit Control-Shift-I and bring up the Google Chrome inspector. Okay, let me get out of this mobile view. Okay, this is the DOM, this right here. So basically what happens is that when Google Chrome or any browser reads your HTML file, it creates a version of your website, a version of your HTML file in memory. And that's called the document. It's a living document in your memory that you can manipulate using JavaScript. Okay, again, that's different than the actual HTML file. If you want to see that, that's in source. So if you want, later on, you can always go back here, take a look at the actual text of the index file versus what we see here, which will change based on what we do, because this is in memory. So when I hit the refresh button, Google Chrome then rereads the sources, rebuilds a new DOM, and that's why everything kind of starts over. Okay, but let's just do some basic stuff. First, we should probably go grab jQuery. So when I say plain vanilla DOM manipulation, those are the DOM tools that are already built into JavaScript. So I don't actually have to load anything to do that. So just to show you that example. First, we're going to be kind of covering, how to select an element so that we can manipulate it. Okay, and again, we're not going to cover everything about DOM manipulation. This is merely an introduction. But basically, the main thing you do is you select elements and you manipulate them. Okay, but basically here, if I want to access the document, I would just type in document, but usually what you want to do is store it in a variable. So we'll say our h1, so const h1. That'll be our variable, and what we're going to do is we're going to store that h1 that's currently on the screen. So document, that represents the document object, which is, again, this thing is basically a tree of mini objects, which are all your HTML tags. So the document is all this, and then under it is the body tag, which under that is the h1 tag, and each of these are a node. And this is a child node of body, and body is a child node of document, and you guys get the idea. So what I want to do is select it. So what you do is use this function called Query Selector. And Query Selector will choose the first element that matches your search. And basically what you're doing is you're using CSS selectors to select an element. So any CSS selector should work. But let's say there's more than one element that matches, it's only going to select the first one. So if I go h1, it's going to find the first h1 and select that. Okay, and then I'm storing that element in my h1. So this h1 now is the same as having that element accessible. And now I can go manipulate that element. So console.log h1. Now before we actually run that, I want to just show you one thing. The function of this defer keyword in my script tag, because this is going to be important. So I'm just going to take that off for a moment and show you what happens if I run this code without it, because this is going to apply to all DOM code. So if I run it and I go to console, see, I console logged h1, but it says null. The reason is because the JavaScript happened or was run before the DOM was rendered. So this h1 didn't exist yet. So that's why we put the defer keyword. The defer keyword says, you know what? Don't run the code till after the browser renders the HTML. So now if I do that and I refresh, and see now it console logs the h1. Okay, so h1, that variable holds my h1, and I can manipulate it. Now over time, this is something you have to kind of learn over time. There's a whole bunch of different properties in each of these elements that I can go and then manipulate. Okay, one of them is like basically the inner HTML, which is the HTML within the h1 tags. Okay, so I can do, so if I do this, okay, see within the h1 tags is just hello world because there's no actual other HTML. But now I can actually change that if I want to. So I can be like h1.inner HTML equals goodbye world. Okay, and see it changed it to goodbye world. So it says goodbye world here when I take a look at my elements because it shows you the living DOM. But if I go to sources and click on index.html, it still says hello world because it shows you the actual original HTML file from which elements was created. Okay, so again, this is like the living, breathing version. This is sort of the original static version. So if you want to see what your website was kind of created from. Now let's bring in jQuery. Okay, so for that, we just close some of these extra windows. I think it's what jQuery, yep, jquery.com. And jQuery was a library that makes DOM manipulation easier. Because again, keep in mind, typing in document.query selector, there's a whole bunch of other ones. It gets old after a while, and it's a lot of typing. It's very verbose. Typing h1.inner HTML. Why do I need the inner? Why can't it be just h1.html? So jQuery tried to simplify a lot of this, and there was a bunch of other libraries like MooTools and whatnot that tried to do the same thing. And jQuery ended up kind of winning out as in sort of the DOM manipulation library wars of yesteryear. Now, jQuery definitely has not become is not as used for newer websites as it used to be, because things like React and Vue and Angular kind of took over how you build your front-end website. And we'll talk more about that when we get to web components. But jQuery is still a useful skill to learn, because if you go back to any website that was built probably earlier than 2-3 years ago, it probably uses jQuery to some extent. And if you go even before then it's probably very much built on jQuery. So, you know, if you're someone who's going to be a professional developer and you're looking for work, knowing jQuery is still important, because you might be working with lots of legacy code. Just because, you know, people aren't talking about this is the new thing and there's huge new features being added to it. Even though jQuery seems to be still in development, still has lots of cool new stuff being added to it all the time and whatnot, it doesn't mean that it isn't relevant to a lot of companies and a lot of job contexts. So keep that in mind. So jQuery is still a good thing to know, even though you're not necessarily seeing huge amounts of like new tutorials on it. So let's actually grab this jQuery and add it to our code. So I think it's, I always forget, I think I want to go to API documentation. Where do I get the, no, let's go to the download. You could download it. I always like to use the CDN. I think I have to scroll down a little bit. Here we go. Use the jQuery Cdn. Click on code.jquery.com, and then here we go. We're going to use the newest version. We're going to use the newest uncompressed one. And then you're going to take this script tag. We're going to go back to our index.html and put the script tag above our normal script tag. Oh, actually, I already have it there. Nice. I just noticed it's right there already. Okay, but so just add that, but I'm going to re-add it again in case there's been any changes. So this was 3.41 last time I did a video on this. Now it's 3.5. So yeah, it's changed. So good thing I'm updating. Okay, so let me just make sure, but I didn't copy that script tag, right? So I'm going to hit Control Z, go back over here. Yep, I forgot to copy the very beginning there. Let's Control C. Replace this. Okay, now I have the newer version. And we're good to go. So Jquery pretty much does the same thing, except in Jquery, and again, the way Jquery does it is that all the nodes are created into a separate type of Jquery specific object. So in that case, once I select an element using Jquery, I cannot use like stuff like this on that selection, and vice versa. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, how did I select it? Did I use plain vanilla, the stuff that's built into JavaScript? Then I gotta use that going forward to manipulate that variable. If I use Jquery to grab it, then I gotta use Jquery to manipulate it. But let's say I wanted to do the same thing. So I'm gonna comment this out. So the equivalent in Jquery would be this. I would say const, and usually the convention is when it's a Jquery thing, I'll just use a $sign in front of my variable names. You don't have to, it's just a convention. So const h1 equals, in this case, what you use is that everything in Jquery is just this $sign function. And basically, depending on what you put in the $sign function will determine what it does. And the benefit is, this is a lot less typing than all this. Okay? Yeah, that's a lot less typing. And here I can just put in h1. So if I just put in h1, it means go look for an h1 and it will go grab me all the h1s. Okay, so if I do that, yeah, that should just grab me the h1. So if I console.log $h1, so we can see what we got. Let's take a look. And no, here. Refresh. And see, it's a special Jquery object, so notice that console log is a bit different. But it is an h1 that I selected, but now I have access to all these Jquery functions to manipulate it. Okay, so if I wanted to change the inner HTML of that h1, I would then do something like this. It would be like $h1 dot I think it's HTML, except now it's a function. And then in this function, if I leave it empty, it grabs and will return to me the inner HTML. If I pass it a value, it'll then replace it and then return me the inner HTML. So I'm just going to change this to goodbye world. So a lot of the functions in Jquery serve double duty. They don't just change things, but they can grab you the current value if you're not trying to change it. So that's just kind of a thing you have to get used to. And then, so generally, oftentimes, it's just a property that I change, like I did here in plain vanilla DOM. Oftentimes here, it's a function that does the changing in Jquery world. So now if I go here, I'll say the same thing. It does the same thing. But again, this is just like a little less verbose, a little bit less typing than this. And that's why people liked it. It was a little bit more straightforward. Cool. Okay, so now we know how we can select an element. And it's not the only way. There's lots of ways to select an element, and then lots of ways to manipulate it. You can change your CSS or whatnot. But I'll let you read the documentation. The point of this video is just to kind of introduce to you the workflow, the basic concept of what this does. So next thing is element creation. So how are we going to create an element? Element creation. So let's say we want to add an h2. Okay, so first we'll do it in plain vanilla DOM. So we'll say const h2 equals document dot create. You see here, I think it's create element. And then we put the name of the element, so I'm going to create an h2. Okay, nice. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll change that h2's dot inner HTML. You could also change inner text. So if you don't really plan on putting any HTML within the HTML tag, I could just do inner text and just change this to goodbye world. That needs to be a string. Okay, now I need to add it to somewhere. So then what I do is I'll go grab the body tag. So document dot query selector. The body, so I've grabbed the body and I want to append child. And I'm going to append the h2. So essentially, just to kind of walk this. This creates the h2 element. Right now it's not on the screen because I created it, but I didn't actually put it anywhere. Here I'm going to just change it to have goodbye world, so that way it says something. And then here I actually add it to the document. I actually append it somewhere on the screen by saying, hey, we'll select the body tag, and in the body tag add an h2, add this h2 to it, which adds it to the end of all other elements. So any other elements, this would be at the bottom of it. So it'll be below the h1. So we'll hit save. Let's see here. Let's make sure that all worked. And it worked. See? Hello world, goodbye world. I go to the body tag. See, there's the h2 after the h1. But I did not change the HTML file. If I go back to the index.html, see, it's still just an h1. Again, when you're editing, manipulating the document, you're not manipulating the HTML file. You're manipulating the live document object that is created when the index file is read. Cool. Now, how would we do this in jQuery? Okay. Control, I'll comment that out. We do const $h2 equals, and then you use the $sign function. The only difference now is that instead of just saying h2, I'm not selecting an h2, I'm creating h2, so you put the caret tag as like it's an h2 tag. That actually creates a new element. So see, that's a lot less verbose than this. Okay. Okay, and then again we'll change the h2's text, h2, except this will be a text function, so it'll be like that. And we just do the same thing, goodbye world. So that makes the text of the h2 goodbye world, and then we need to actually attach it to the DOM. So we'll select the body tag. So instead of storing the I'm in a variable, because I'm only using it once real quick, I'm going to select body, use the append function. Okay, and then I'm going to append the h2. Okay, so it's the same logic. I create it, I change the text, and then I attach it. Same thing I did here, but again, just a little bit less verbose, a little bit less typing, a little bit more straightforward. That's the beauty of jQuery. Okay, so now if I refresh this, see, still works. The goodbye world is still there, even though we commented out the original code. It still does the thing. Okay, cool. So that's essentially a quick introduction to how jQuery and plain vanilla DOM manipulation works. One last thing I'm going to show you is how to do events. Okay, events. So if you want to make it click on something. So just like before, first we'll do it with plain vanilla, then we'll do it with jQuery. So first I'm going to grab that h1. So const h1 equals document dot query selector h1. And then what I'm going to do is take h1 and I'm going to add an event to it. So I'm going to say add event listener. And then what you do is first we're going to add the type. So this is going to be a click event. And then second, you add a function, which can take in an event object. I'm not going to get into like event stop propagations, things like that. You guys can watch a video about form handling for that. But here I can just say what's going to happen. Okay. Cool. But just so you know, standard you usually put an E here, which stands for an event. And if you wonder what that object has, because every time you do an event, an object gets passed into the function that has all the information about the event. So that's what would be. So if you want to see what the E has, you can just console log it. We'll console log it so you can see it. Console.log E. That this is this big object with all sorts of information. But really all I want to do is take the H1 when you click on it and change the inner HTML. Actually, we'll just say the inner text to goodbye world. That's all we're going to do. Okay, save. So you click on it, that happens. So I hit save, and refresh. So right now, that's all you see. And right now on the console, there's nothing. And now if I click on Hello World, see it changes to Goodbye World. And here you can see all the information about the event. Okay, so basically that event object that gets passed into the function has all these details and functions and all sorts of other really cool stuff going on. Not a bad thing to kind of explore and take a look at what's in here. So you can examine if there's anything useful in here that you may want to use at any point. There's a few things that come up a lot. Probably the most common things is you'll access this target object to refer to the thing that got clicked on, or where the event target is, because you might want to use the same function for lots of things, but you only want to get the information from the thing that they actually clicked on. The thing they actually clicked on is the target, so you can access all the properties of that here and do some fun stuff with it. Okay, there's a bunch of other cool stuff in there. Cool. So that's event handling, and you can do any kind of event. So there's click events, focus events, change events, but you put whatever event. Usually you would normally do like on click, on this. You always put the other part. So this is an on click event. And again, so basically it's the type of event and then a callback function that gets passed in the event. So you could put an event instead of E if you want, that gets passed into this function. Okay, so that's how you would do that in plain vanilla DOM manipulation. Now how would we do this in jQuery? First, let's go grab the H1. H1 equals $ function H1. And then what we do is you do $H1, and then the function is just called on. So instead of add event listener, it's just called on, like on click. And then in here we pass in the type of event, so on click. And then just like before, we pass in our callback that also takes an E. It's literally the same function. And I can now just do the same thing, console.log E, just so you can see that we're still getting the event object. And then I will take the H1, change the text to goodbye world. Okay, and if I hit save and I refresh, see it's hello world again. Again, nothing in the console, but if I click on it, changes the goodbye world, and then there's the event. It's just a jQuery version of the event, but it has all the same information. And again, there are a lot of jQuery functions. There's a lot of DOM element functions. If you want to learn all of them, just read the documentation. There's a lot of good stuff in there. But this kind of gives you the tools to do the basic selection, creation, events. That's probably the majority of what you would do with it. Okay, cool. Okay, one last piece to learn. Now what happened is that over time, the way you build your front end has changed. And nowadays, because of React, Angular, and Vue, we shifted from just manipulating our DOM, like this via the JavaScript file, to using what's called called components. Components, the idea is that you create encapsulation of your, not just the HTML, the template, but also CSS and JavaScript. You just kind of make these bundles. And the only way you really could do that was through libraries like React, Angular, and Vue, and a couple other ones, Ember, Backbone, etc. Nowadays you got some Svelte is like the newest one, which is actually pretty awesome. But what happened is that eventually they're like, why don't we just make this something you can do normally in the browser? Like something you can, why can't you just build your own components and build your own HTML tags? Why not? So they've recently added this API. The only reason it's not like the new main thing to do is because browser support's still an issue. Like most browsers, pretty much all the new browsers support it. The question is everyone using the newest version of the browsers? That's where why web components haven't necessarily become the norm yet. Because why would I want to load in a huge library like React, Angular, or Vue when I can just already now do that straight out of JavaScript in the browser and save myself all that loading time? But it's because of compatibility. But over time, it's going to happen. Okay. So let me just show you how this works. So web components, how to create your own web component. It's just classes. That's all it is. Okay, so web components. And basically what you do is if you want to create a web component, what you do is you're going to create a new class. So we're going to say class called Goodbye World. So we're going to create a tag called Goodbye World. And it always has to extend this HTML element class. This HTML element class is a class that actually generates an HTML element, or the boilerplate for an HTML element. And then that's that. I mean, that technically does the trick. I could literally just stop there. It doesn't do anything special. Now it's just an HTML element. But usually what you're going to do is you have to go into the constructor. First thing you're going to want to do is call the parent constructor, so that way make sure that does all the parent stuff. So super. And to keep it really simple, I'm going to keep this there's a lot you can do here, but I'm going to keep this super simple. You would just want to add a template. So you can just say this dot inner HTML equals, and then I would just put some backticks and create a string. So I'll just say, hey, this equals a div, and inside that div there's an h1, and that says goodbye world. Okay, and then we're going to use an inline style. Style equals color orange. Okay, and we'll close that h1. And we will close that div. Okay, and that's it. That's literally all this constructor is going to do. Okay. Otherwise, I could do all the same stuff. I could create functions on it. I can add methods, add properties, add all sorts of really complicated logic to my element, but I just really kind of want to illustrate how you get to the basic HTML element if you want to just kind of pre-make things you want to reuse. So here we go, div h1 style, color orange, good. So now that I've created that, I need to register it with the browser so I can use it as an HTML tag. So you do is you're going to do window dot custom elements dot define. So that's the function. Then you put in the name of the element. So the HTML tag is going to be goodbye, and you have to have kebab case. So there has to be a dash somewhere in there. So goodbye world. So usually the reason they do that is so that way there's no chance that you'll override a existing HTML element. And then you put comma and goodbye world, comma, and then you put in the name of the class that's extending, that it's going to generate. So goodbye world, there. And that's it. Okay, I now have a HTML element I can put in here, so I can go down here and put in goodbye world slash, and there you go, goodbye world. Save. I go here, and if I refresh, hello world, and there's my goodbye world component. Everything's encapsulated in that little custom HTML tag right here. So for now, I mean, there's a lot of other really cool logic. I don't want to get too crazy about it right now, but this is the basics, the very, very basics. So you can create a little batch of HTML if you plan on using it like I would do this if you think it's something you're going to use more than once. So that way you don't have to type it up every single time. You can just use the component and plop it wherever you need to. Okay, and yeah, that's how you build it. It's a good thing to get in the habit of building. Again, you're limited by your imagination. What could happen in here? The only things that are required is that when you call the constructor, you got to call super. You have to extend the HTML element, and then if you want to actually create this as an HTML tag, you have to make sure you run this whole register function here. Okay. Cool. I will leave it at that. I'll see you guys in the next video. So hopefully this has all helped you out learn a little bit more about basic DOM manipulation, basic jQuery, and the basics of the utter basics of using web components in the browser. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.